Hello everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Mirabel, founder of Real Land Fashion, and in today's video I'm going to be showing you how to cut and sew this beautiful overbust corset that you can see right here in the video. This corset is very versatile because you can use it with a pencil skirt, with a trouser, or with a gather skirt, as you can see on the thumbnail. I believe most of us may not want to go through the stress of using a bust caging for our overbust corsets. Today's video is going to be focused on how you can cut and sew an overbust corset even without any form of bust caging. You are going to get a perfect result. Please remember to like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't. With that being said, let's get started. For today's video, you'll be needing just 1 yard of Ankara fabric. Another thing that you'll be needing is your pattern paper, as shown right here, because we are going to be drafting it on the pattern paper before we transfer it on the fabric. So the first thing you are going to do is to draw a straight line at the top of the paper. I always like to do this, and I label it the top line. That is where all our measurements will start from. So after that, the first measurements we are going to be taking is our bust line measurements. After that, you mark your under bust measurements and your front waistline measurements. Remember, I said front waistline and not back waistline. So your front waistline is different from your back waistline measurements. Then after that, you will mark your hip line measurements. So sorry it did not show. My hip line is 24.5 inches. Then after you draw this, after marking it, you are going to draw it on the other part, and you are going to draw a straight line like this. Then from here, I'm going to go up by 2 inches, and I'll be using this as my chest line. So from the top line again, I'm going to mark half of my shoulder measurements. I'll mark it on the chest line as well, which is 7 inches. And then from this top line, I'll go down by 1 inch, and I'll draw a straight line like this. Then from this point, I'm going to mark my neck width measurements, which is 3 inches, and I'll connect it to that 1 inch point like this. Then after that, I'm going to divide this line by 2, which is 7 inches divided by 2 is 3.5, and I'll mark it there. While on the chest line, I'm going to divide my bust measurements by 4, and I'll mark it there. While here, I'll go in by ½ an inch, and with my French curve, I'm going to connect it from the shoulder through the ½ an inch all the way to the bust measurements. So take notes that I use dotted lines for this because this is not the main armhole measurement. Next, I'm going to divide my bust span by 2. That is my nipple to nipple measurement, and I'll mark it on the bust line, on the front waistline measurement, and on the hip line measurement, and I'll draw a straight line. So now for the dart, I'm going to be using 0.75 inch on both sides. You can use 1 inch on both sides depending on how full you want the bust area to be. So I'm using 0.75 for my own measurements, and with this I will connect it using a straight line all the way from the hip line all the way to the under bust line like this. And then from this bust line measurements, I'm going to go down by 1 inch, and then from this point I'll use my French curve and I'll connect it to the under bust area. So with this, we have successfully tightened the under bust so that it will be fitted around that area. Then here on the shoulder, I'm going to divide the shoulder by 2, and with my rule, I'm going to connect it to the bust line like this, drawing the shoulder darts. So on this shoulder dart, I'm going to go up by 4 inches. You can go up as far as 5 inches depending on how high you want the overbust to be. Then from there, you are going to connect it, drawing a straight line like this. So on this new line, I'm going to mark 0.5 inch on both sides. You can use 0.25 inch on both sides as well, but I decided to use 0.5 inch because I want that place to be a little bit tighter. And now I'll connect it all the way to the shoulder, like as I'm doing right now. So after that, the next thing I'm going to do is take note of the dart that is on this point. the dart is 0.5 inch there, so I'm just going to replace it on the chest line points like that. While on the bust line, I'm going to divide my bust measurements by 4 and I'll mark it on the bust line as well. On the waistline, I'll divide my waist measurement by 4, I'll mark it there, and I'll also replace the 1.5 inch dart. Remember, we took 0.75 on both sides, so that means the total dart we used is 1.5. While on the hip line, I'm going to divide it by 4 and I'll mark extra 1.5 inch as well. So now I'm just going to connect from the chest line all the way to the front waistline, and then from the front waistline I'm going to connect all the way to the hip line. So I'm going to curve it a little bit because of the hip area at that point. So now remember, I'm using my front waistline measurements. So for the back waistline is 15 inches while my front waistline is 16.5. So in order to make sure that the front and the back are equal by the time we are joining it at the side seam, I'm going to minus the back waistline from the front waistline. So the SS is 1.5 inch. So this 1.5 inch from the bust line, I'm going to go down by the 1.5 inch and I'll connect it to the bust point like this, and this will be the side dart. So now I'm going to slash the side dart open like this, and I'll also slash this point open like this. And now I'll be taking the shoulder dart. So just pay attention to how I folded it. So after taking the shoulder dart, I'm going to use my front curve and I'll connect it from that 4.4 inches point all the way to the chest line like this. So with this, I've successfully drawn the neckline. So for the armhole of this overbust corset, I'm going to go out by half an inch from that point like this, and with the front curve I'm going to connect it all the way to that 4 inches point like this. So with this, we have drawn the armhole for this overbust corset. So after drawing the armhole, I'm just going to open up the dart again, and I will slash it open at the middle. So after slashing it open, I'm going to be closing the bust dart, that is a side dart. So I'll close it and I'll tape it down like this. So after closing it, you'll notice that the side seam, the line is no longer straight at that point. So all you have to do now is to just connect it from your chest line, just connect it using a straight rule to your waistline, drawing a straight line. So for this part now, we want to snatch the waist further because we want this corset to be really fitted around our waist. So I'm just going to randomly pick any point and just divide it into 2. Then I'll go in by 0.25 inch on both sides, taking the dart of about 0.5 inch. So with this now, the waistline of this corset is going to be very snatched by the time we are done sewing. But for the hip line, I'm going to go up by about 3 inches away from the hip line, and that's where the dart is going to stop. So on this point now, I'm going to go down by 4 inch. We don't want our corset to go all the way to the hip line, so I'll go up by 4 inch, while on this other side I'll go down by 6 inch. With my front curve, I'm just going to connect it like this. So pay attention to how I'm connecting it. On the side, on the darts, I make sure I drew a straight line, while on every other side I just curved it to form that curve that you can see on the corset. So with this now, I'm just going to be slashing it open like this. So just pay attention to the lines that I am following while cutting. I'll make sure that I remove all the darts that I created while cutting this, and I'll also remove the neckline, and make sure you label it 1, 2, 3. So now we are done with the front. So the next thing we are going to do now is to cut the back. So in order to cut the back is very simple. you're just going to mark your chest line measurement. Remember, my bust line is 10 inches. Going up by 2 inches, that means my chest line is 8 inches. And then my back waistline, remember I said my back waistline is 15 inches, whereas my front waistline is 16.5. So for the back, I'm going to be using the back waistline, so I'm marking 15 inches for the back. So when you're done marking, you're just going to draw a straight line. And also remember to mark your hip line measurement, which is 24.5 inches for mine. The next thing I want to do is I'm going to divide my shoulder by 2, and I'll mark it on the top line and on the chest line. While I'll go down by 1 inch from this point, just like what we did for the front. I'm going to do the same thing for the back as well. And I'll connect it to the chest line. And here I'm going to mark my neck width, and I'll connect it to the 1 inch point like this. So the next thing to do now is I'm going to divide my bust measurement by 4, and I'll mark it on the chest line. While I'm going to divide this line by 2, and I'll mark it there. And then with my front curve, I'm going to connect it like this. Then after that, the next thing to do now, from the chest line, I'll go down by 1 inch. While on the chest line, at that armhole area, I'm going to go down by half an inch. Remember, we went down by half an inch on the front, so I'm going to do the same thing for the back as well. On the chest line, I'm going to mark my bust span measurements. That is half of my bust span measurements. I'll mark it and I'll connect it all the way to the hip line. Although on the chest line, I'm going to go down by 1 inch, and I'll mark it there. So on this point, I'm going to mark 0.5 inch on both sides for the dart. That means I'm using a dart of 1 inch. So now I'm just going to use my front curve to connect it like this all the way to that half an inch point. And then on this point, I'm going to mark 0.25 inch on both sides, and I'll connect it to the waistline. So on the waistline now, I'm going to divide my waist by 4, and I'll mark it, and I'll also add the 1 inch that we left for the dart. While for the hip line, I'm going to divide my hip by 4, and I'm going to mark it there. So with this now, I'm just going to draw a straight line connecting it to the hip line like this. So after that, I'm also going to mark out where the loop is going to be. That is the eyelet. So remember to just mark this out so that you know exactly where the eyelet is going to be, because the front can be confusing. By the time you're cutting, you might be confused. So at this point also, I'm going to divide this side by 2, and I'll go in by 0.25 inch on both sides. Just like we did for the front, we are doing the same thing for the back. We are trying to snatch the waist at the back as well. So I'm going in by 0.25 inch on both sides, and I'm going to connect it to the chest line and also down to the hip line like this. So with this now, this is the front pattern. I'm just going to place it on the back like this, and I'm going to trace it out. Exactly what we have for the front, we are going to be tracing it for the back as well. So just make sure you trace it out the way I'm doing. Then after that, I'm just going to use my front curve, and I'll connect it. So as you can see now, the back and the front, they are aligned. Okay, so that by the time we are joining it, it's going to be equal. So at this point, I'm going to be removing the darts on this pattern, and this is what we have. So go ahead and label it just like we did for the front. You can label it for the back as well, so that by the time you're joining, you're not going to be confused. So these are all the patterns that we have drafted. This one is for the front, and this other side is for the back. So I'm going to be placing all of these on the fabric, and I'm going to be cutting. So I've cut for the back, so remember to cut lining as well. And what I did was I added half an inch to all this side, apart from the pattern paper one, which I cut on fold. But every other place I added half an inch all round. So another thing that I did was to add hairstay to it. So before you cut, you can add the hairstay to the fabric before you cut. And then another thing as well is to add a gum stay as well, only to the bust area of this fabric. So, and you're doing it for the front and for the lining as well. So now I'm going to be joining pattern paper 1 to 2. After I've joined the 1 and 2 together, this is what it looks like. So now I'm going to be joining 3 to this at the dart area, just like we did for the first one. So after joining the 3, this is what it looks like. So we have done joining all sides. So now you can go ahead and cut out the excess like this. So this is the back. This is what we have for the back. I've also cut the lining, and like the front, I added 1/2 inch to all sides. But unlike the front, I did not cut it on fold. So every other place I added 1/2 inch to it. So now I'm just going to be joining it at the side seam, that is at that area point. So the back can be very confusing, so make sure you join it as soon as you remove the pattern paper from the fabric. Join it immediately so that you will not be confused where is the front and where is the back, or where is the left side or the right side. So after joining the back, this is what it looks like, and this is what the front looks like at this point. Okay, so now the next thing to do is I'm going to fold the front into 2 equal parts like this, and I'm going to find the midpoint on the down part and on the neckline points, and I will notch it. So after notching, I'm going to open it up, and this is what we have. So with this, I'm just going to be drawing a straight line from the neckline all the way to the hemline point. Then while on the under bust area, I'm going to connect it to about 1.5 inches away from the midpoint, and then the other one too, I'm going to mark from the armhole all the way to about 1.5 inch away from the previous one. So exactly what we have for this side, I'm going to do the same thing for the other side. So I'm going to mark 1.5 inch away from the midpoint, and I'll connect it to the under bust area like this. While for this other side as well, I'm going to connect it to the armhole curve. So this line that we are drawing is where we are going to be passing the boning channel through, and we are creating this V shape so that it will give the illusion of a small waist line. Okay, so now I have a piece of fabric that I've cut that is 2 inches wide. So when you place it on fold, this is what it should look like. So now I'm just going to be passing my regime boning through it like this. So I'm going to fold it inside like this, and I will be placing the fabric on the line that we drew out earlier. So just make sure you align everything together. And now I'm just going to take it to the sewing machine, and I will sew using 0.5 inch sewing allowance. So after I was done sewing, this is what we have. So now I'm just going to go ahead and cut out the excess like this. So when you cut out the excess, you're going to just fold it in like this, just the way I'm doing it. Just fold it, and then you go ahead and top stitch it. So you can sew on the regime boning, okay, and sew it very close to the edge of the fabric. So I've done on all sides, remaining this part. So I'm just going to show you exactly what I did for the bust area. So for the bust area, you are going to make sure you are not sewing it straight, you are curving it, so that by the time you're done, that bust area will still be prominent, and it will still come out very fine. So when you're sewing, make sure you follow the line on the bust area. So don't squeeze it, don't sew it straight, just follow the curve as it is on the fabric. And then you're going to do the same thing. You're going to sew from the armhole all the way to the hemline. So I'm done sewing all sides, and this is what we have. And I've also added the regime boning to the back as well. But for the back, I just followed the dart area, that is the dart lines. I did not draw any special lines for the back. So now I'm just going to be joining the back to the front at the side seam. So I'll be using 1/2 inch sewing allowance, which is the allowance we left while we were cutting. Okay, so I'll join the other side as well using 1/2 inch sewing allowance. So by the time I'm done sewing, this is what we have. Okay, so by the time you open it up, this is what it looks like. So the back and the front, they are together at this point. So now I'm just going to be joining the lining as well. So remember exactly what we are doing for the main fabric. We're going to do the same thing for the lining. The only difference is that for the lining, we are not going to be adding any bone into it. We are just going to be joining everything and ironing it very clean. So now I'm just going to be joining the back to the front from the neckline all the way to the other side, and I'm also going to be joining it at the eyelet area. Okay, by the time I'm done sewing, this is what it looks like. So you're going to notch it and turn it to the right side, and this is what we have. Please take your time and iron it very well. So after you're done joining it and you iron it very well, the next thing you're going to do is you're going to take it to the sewing machine and you're going to sew using 1/2 inch sewing allowance, joining the fabric to the lining. So with this, you are going to be creating a boning channel. So through this boning channel, you are going to pass your plastic boning through it, and you're going to do the same thing for the other side. So the essence of the plastic boning is to make sure that by the time we are tying it at the back, everything is going to be firm and it's not going to be squeezing at that back area. Okay, so just do the same thing on the other side, and this is what it looks like. So it's at this point that I saw the thumbnail and I realized that the hemline is not curved like this. So I decided to follow the hemline that is on the thumbnail, and that is why I decided to cut it in. That is from the side seam. I just reduced it inward by about 3 inches inward. Okay, so I'll just fold it into equal parts to make sure that what we have for the left side is the same thing as what we have for the right. So if the one is longer, I'm just going to cut the excess and make sure that they are equal on all sides. So but the way it was earlier, you can still use it that way. Okay, this part is completely optional. So after you're done with this, now you're going to be closing the hemline. So I'm going to be using a piece of fabric to close it. You can use a bias tape for this, but I'm using the main fabric. So for the back, I decided to add loop to this because at this point I do not have the eyelet machine and I do not want to go outside to do it. That will be all for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. Please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in my next